Wie stark ist der Mensch? Wie stark? Wie viel Längste, wie viel Druck kann ertragen?
So the name Tenant of Culture is derived from the writing of Michel de Certeau, who uses the allegory of the tenant as to illustrate like large or renting within larger pre-existing structures. And when I chose the name, I came from a fashion background but started exhibiting more in a fine art context. So I was kind of looking for a place that was not an artist, not a fashion designer, and it became Tenant of Culture. And for me, it represents the idea that you don't work in the sort of with the romantic notion of the autonomous artist. Are you going to ask that? But work more in a more fluid form, so it can take different shapes. And I wanted to remain open in the sense that maybe you could become a collective at one point, do workshops, and for me, it gave me a little freedom rather than saying, this is my work, this is my identity. And then simultaneously, it also relates to the idea of the fashion brand. So you have a lot of, for example, like Maison, Martin Margiela, or House of Holland, like fashion brands often refer to this house structure. So I thought it would be funny to play with that by saying like I'm renting it within that larger house structure. So I'm presenting multiple pieces that I've made throughout various points. So some pieces are from 2017, some are very recent. And the first part of the exhibition is a steel clothing reel that I had made that is sort of inspired on a room divider / garment reel out of very thin steel. And on it are some garments that I recycled that have very obvious bits of other pieces of clothing in them. And on the other side of that is a shelving, sort of inspired on shelving unit with unwearable shoe sculptures that are embedded in concrete or use techniques such as mosaic on them. And then in the middle there's 3 backpack jackets from the series Works and Days, and they are backpacks that are constructed out of, or jackets that are constructed out of recycled traveling backpacks, and they are hanging on steel structures that reference leisure, extreme sports, but also rigging, theater rigging, so the structures that you use to pull up people when they're flying. And then the last bit is 2 mannequins, and I reconstructed garments into a new installation that is called, I Forgot to Tell You I've Changed. And this is 2 mannequins sitting next to each other in garments that are constructed out of several used items, and they're both wearing an ombre wig, and they are hollow casts of real bodies. When you recycle in your work, I think the process of finding the pieces and deconstructing the pieces is about 70% of the work, basically. So I spend a lot of time sourcing and deconstructing. Sometimes I have this idea, like I want to make a garment such as the backpack jackets, which has on every inch, it has to have a functional detail. So it either has to have a pocket or a zipper or anything. And then I sketch a garment that I would like to see. But the nature of recycling is that you have to improvise. You don't work with new materials, and new materials you can manipulate in the way you want them exactly. Whereas my materials have a bit more resistance, and they have their own kind of will because they have details and materiality that I haven't designed or made. But I really like that, so you have to, I think improvisation is quite a big part of my practice, where sort of anti-strategy, where you just make it up as you go along. And sometimes, this sounds really cliche, but you find something and it already tells you what to do with it rather than you constructing it into something. Fashion can change a ideological structure such as recycling and turn it into something that can be capitalized upon very easily. So I think you have to be very wary as a fashion designer that you use ideology and deconstruction and recycling not as a tool for your own branding, but as a tool for change. And there's a very fine line between that I think a lot of companies abuse the efforts of young designers and, for example, create patchwork out of new garments. Like, I mean, Vetements does it as well, like, you know, create this recycled aesthetic but sell it back to you for so much more money. And this exchange of value, on one hand, I'm really intrigued by it, and it's also a subject in my work. On the other hand, it's obviously a dangerous territory morally, seeing fashion as an industry is very predetermined, and there's not much room for improvising within that structure. So I felt like I wanted to work with garments, but not within the industry of fashion. Now you see a lot more brands and things that are doing very different things, so that is, the landscape is definitely changing. But there was this tipping point for me where fashion as a phenomenon became more interesting to me as a subject rather than an industry or medium I wanted to work in. And I started like examining what it meant to make clothes, what clothes mean in society, the larger sort of cultural value attached to signifiers that are embedded into garments, and also things like trend, seasonality, that kind of stuff started to interest me more as a concept. I don't know, I think the body is a thing in my work that I struggle with, but also try to present in different ways. So the mannequins that I use are casts of my friends and people that I know, so they're hollow casts of real bodies. And for me that's quite important, because I think the mannequin as ready-made in the exhibition space has a lot of different connotations, and is used quite a lot as a symbol for consumerism, fashion, that kind of stuff. And I don't want to have that reference, so I make my own. And then sometimes I use supporting structures that are made of steel or different kind of things. And but I don't really, like, I could do maybe performance or something, but I always choose not to. But what I think is quite interesting about the body in this day and age, and talking about waste and recycling, and you know, we live in a time where there's so much overproduction, there's so much waste, that in a sense that we've created. And because we are now so overpopulated with people, that I think our bodies are starting to identify with waste itself. So I think we're almost like a plague at the moment, and people say like the worst thing you can do is have a child, that's the worst thing you can do for the environment. So slowly we're starting to inherit this feeling of you're too much, your body's too much, so you're a wasteful object yourself. And I think that is quite an interesting shift in a very dystopian vision on the body for the future, and how people would treat it and how they would dress a body that is essentially a wasteful thing. Could be something quite interesting to, progress, I don't know,